Welcome, comrades and friends, to Workers' World Party's weekly broadcast, where hundreds of revolutionaries across the world gather to strategize, to analyze, and to build the struggle for a workers' world. Tonight, we will be focusing on the recent U.S. presidential and vice presidential debates, or more specifically, what wasn't mentioned during those debates. My name is Ted Kelly. My pronouns are he and him. I am coming to you live from Philadelphia, a city where all kinds of things happen, good and bad. And I know that the bourgeois corporate media tends to think that our class has the attention span of a fly or can only focus on a fly, but we know better, and I know that's why everyone is tuning in tonight. Before I introduce our guests, I want to remind you all that while most people are watching on Zoom right now, if you could take a second to go to Workers' World Party's Facebook page and share this live video. It's facebook.com/Workers' World Party. Share it with your friends and in your Facebook groups and pages. That would really enormously help us to reach more members of our class, the working class. Also, we encourage you to share your comments on Twitter @WorkersWorld. We are also live on YouTube tonight for all the YouTubers. And for those of you on Zoom, please add your pronouns and your city so that we can refer to you correctly when we are taking your questions or if you type in the chat. We will have time to take some questions for both Larry and Teresa in about 30 minutes. But without further ado, I now would love to introduce my co-host tonight, who is Ezra Echo from the Buffalo branch. Their pronouns are they and them. Ezra?
Hello, I'm Ezra. I am a newer member of Workers' World Party, an artist and a writer, and we'll be having a conversation tonight with our two guests, leading Workers' World Party comrades Larry Holmes and Teresa Gutierrez. Larry is coming to us from New York City, and he is the first secretary of Workers' World Party. Teresa will be joining us from San Antonio, Texas. The first question we have tonight is, Larry and Teresa, based on your experience as revolutionary communist organizers for the past decades, what issues do you think are being ignored from a working class revolutionary perspective in the 2020 election by Trump and Biden?
Larry, you want to take that one first?
Not unless my comrade Teresa wants to.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Well, everything that's important to the working class is being ignored. This was an insignificant debate last night between Pence and Kamala Harris. They're both bourgeois politicians, and there wasn't much of interest. As a matter of fact, several articles said that the debate was boring. Pence, as we all know, is a ultra reactionary who is the enemy of everything progressive, the working class, LGBTQ people, migrants, Black people, women, just everything. And Kamala Harris, she really had one big job, it seems to me, and that was to not come off too radical. Because the strategy of the Democrats is to run against everything progressive, Medicaid care for all, run against socialism. And that's not based on, I think, primarily a strategy toward the masses. Wouldn't it be one thing if they were running on progressive revolutionary things like socialism? But they're auditioning for the ruling class. And the ruling class says, if you really want to get into power, then you have to be with us and you have to show us that you can be relied upon. So right now you have to demonstrate that you are anything close to a socialist, and that you're not a threat and anything that we can be afraid of. I think actually one of the most interesting comments in relationship to the debate last night came from Trump himself, who said on an interview with some right-wing station that Kamala Harris is a quote unquote monster and a communist. And this is more than racist and sexist. It's that, but it's more than that. It's a message to his right-wing neo-fascist followers that Kamala Harris is the enemy, and she must be prevented from assuming any position. And if she assumes that position, then you are free to destroy her.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. I think these debates, as well as the Democratic and Republican conventions, I admire anybody that can sit through them. It's important to listen. It's important, to pay attention, because it shows you an inclination of what the rich and the powerful are thinking.
Yeah.
The most dangerous thing about the debates, the most dangerous thing about the conventions are the far right-wing turn of the Republican Party, and the fact that the Democrats are incapable and unable and unwilling to fight that turn. They're unwilling to fight for the interests of the workers and the oppressed. The most important thing happening in this country today, well, there's two things that are so important, and that's the police terror in the Black community. And thank goodness to all the Black Lives Matter activists and their allies who continue to fight against this police terror. And that it's a fundamental problem in society. And that issue is not addressed at all in the debates or the conventions. On the contrary, they're vilified. And worst of all, the Republican Party sends out not dog whistles, but air sirens to the right wing to go after the Black community. And then, of course, the other issue is the COVID virus that has created this economic calamity that has killed so many of our people. I know I'm not the only person of color who, if you read one more article that says Black and brown people are the most affected by this or that, by COVID, by evictions, so forth and so on, I have to ask the question, can we call it a genocide yet, when they're coming out after our people? So we have to pay attention. We have to know what the powers that be are, where they're leaning, what their inclination is for the coming period. But most important, we have to organize against the Republicans and the Democrats both.
Thanks both. Those are great opening comments. And, I think, Teresa, that question that you raised in one of your articles, is it a genocide yet? I think, one of the things that we can look to is that the horrendous rate of COVID among migrant and Native and Indigenous populations. And Larry, what you just said too, the messaging about Kamala Harris that Trump is making, while we have our differences and political differences with Kamala Harris, that doesn't mean that she is not genuinely getting targeted by racist and sexist attacks. Mm-hmm. And it's especially dangerous when we just before we started tonight, we were talking about this right-wing militia scheme to attempt to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Like you said, the governor of Michigan is a middle-of-the-road mainstream Democrat, but that doesn't mean that these militias aren't there, seriously mobilized and more like encouraged by Trump. But I want to ask our next question, which is that many of us on the socialist left view the Democrats and Republicans as essentially the same. We, I think, correctly view them as two parties of the racist billionaire ruling class, which ultimately have the same goal, which is the defense of capitalism, and they sort of trade off good cop, bad cop style. Yet we do see that different parts of the ruling class are leaning overtly towards fascism, while others want more this continuation of neoliberal austerity capitalism. Given this tension in the ruling class and this rift, How should the working class intervene in this crisis to exploit those differences and to bring about a revolutionary crisis? And is that possible?
I think it's very possible. I'm very glad, Ted, that you, especially as a white male, made it a point to point out the party's legacy with regards to the national question that even applies to someone as high up as Kamala Harris. We will criticize Kamala Harris. We don't call her by her first name, just like we don't call men. We will criticize Harris on their politics, on their program, their political program, but we will not use sexist language. We will not use racist language, and we challenge the movement not to do that.
Yes.
A good political point to raise about Harris is that before Biden was selected, Kamala Harris had actually raised more money from billionaires than Biden, indicating that there's a sector of the ruling class that sees that it's important to have this person, in power right now. I remember Larry making a joke when Obama got elected in the year that he got elected. The economy was, going on a free fall as a result of the Wall Street crisis. And Larry was saying, oh, great, the economy is going to tank and they give it to a brother, to handle, and it was sort of like, yeah. But the ruling class was smart to pick a Black man, and smart to pick Kamala and so forth. And that's why socialists have to be careful, to address this, especially when Trump, the ultra-right wing, is going after them in such a vile way. So, fascism is definitely, it's so clear that Trump wants fascism. And it's clear based on the billions of money that he's raising, that there's also an element in the ruling class that is going there. And it's because they see the writing on the wall. COVID and police terror has created a perfect storm for revolutionary change, for fundamental change. People understand that you have to have a centralized healthcare system now. They understand that. They understand that there has to be the PPE and the mask and everything in preparation for the next virus, the next healthcare crisis. And people are getting that on the ground. And so they understand that workers are going to fight for more. And so when workers are in motion, the ruling class worries that the pitchforks are going to come after them. And so there is an element of the ruling class that is going there. And that's why the urgency for organizing and fighting starting today, and especially the day after the elections, is so important.
Yeah, I would only add to that we have to have a solution, a path that is independent of the bourgeois parties. You have to have that. Otherwise, your answer is, rhetorical. Don't support either of them. Yeah, that's easy to say, but what is your alternative? At this moment, when the crisis facing the workers in the oppressed here and of the world is so dangerous and it's growing, the COVID pandemic, the unemployment, the evictions, the racism, police terror, all of it, that's just scratching the surface. We have to have a real alternative. And that alternative, in our view, in Workers' World Party's view, is that the working class movement has to be rebuilt. It has to be rebuilt into a militant, struggle-oriented, multinational, embrace the impress. It has to be on an international basis, but of course our major responsibility is here in the belly of the beast. And revolutionaries have to begin that work immediately. We can't just be waiting for other things years ahead to do the work for us. What do I mean by that concretely? This tremendous uprising against police murder and terror that was sparked by the lynching of George Floyd in late May and fueled by the massacre of Breonna Taylor and so many others. There were tremendous demonstrations all over the world, millions of people. This is a working class movement. It doesn't call itself a working class movement. But if you look at its social base, it's primarily young people, but they are working class people. Our job is to do what we can to make that movement conscious of their class character. And I believe that they have to, in a way, almost attack the organized labor movement. That's a contradictory statement because I support organized labor. We all support the unions. They're absolutely necessary, even if they're, full of faults that we like to talk about. But they're part of the defense of the working class. But they're not doing enough. Their leadership is too moderate. Their leadership is too conservative. Their leadership is afraid of and dismissive of migrant workers, of the unemployed. I was talking to some migrant workers today who were considering organizing an independent union. And the reason why they felt they had to consider this path is because no union will work with them because they're too difficult to organize from the point of view of traditional labor practices. You get the workers, they vote for a union, they engage in collective bargaining, and but what about migrant workers? What about workers without documents who are constantly hounded? What about many sectors of our class who their circumstances don't make it easy for them to be involved in traditional labor organizing? It's not just migrant workers, although I think they're the most, they're the most stark example of this reality. A lot of workers who are gig workers, including some of those young workers who have bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and thought they were on the way to a nice petty bourgeois life, and find out that they're working at Starbucks and changing apartments every 3 months because they can't afford rent, especially in these expensive cities like New York, maybe even Buffalo, Ezra, I don't know. But we've got to understand that the labor movement, the organized labor movement, it really only represents under 10% of the workers. The migrants, the undocumented, the Black youth, the unemployed who are growing, young people, they don't represent them, see? And what are we going to do? Well, hey, can't do anything about that? No. See, if we do that, then the danger of fascism becomes greater. We've got to find a way, see, to take those forces that are not in the organized labor movement and pull them together, because they are the working class. In many ways, they're the most dynamic working class. What's more dynamic than these rebellions against police terror? Oh my goodness, wow. I mean, people talk about general strikes. That's great. That was kind of a general strike that they had in response to George Floyd.
Of a sort, yeah.
I have never seen a police station burned down. I mean, wow. I mean, that was a global general strike. Talk about, like, you got to pay attention to this, and we've got to try. We can't do it alone, of course. Workers' world can't do it alone, but we've got to be part of the movement to help, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it takes, to forge this section of our class into the militant new wing of the working class. And that wing has got to, dynamically engage with the organized labor movement, which at least at the top is a problem. Let's face it, it's a problem. And change that. That's revolutionary. That's the dynamic. That's the dialectic of revolution. And so this is not a long-term perspective. It may take a while for us to accomplish this, and it won't be easy. But this is something that we've got to set about immediately. Of course, all that's not going to be done by November 3rd. So our first priority is that we've got to monitor the fascist developments that take place. Like this, plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Some other time you would have dismissed it as some isolated thing, but not now. Not now. There's too much going on. There's a lot. The fascists have arms. They want to go to the polls. They want to harass Black and brown people. From the right to vote. We don't know if Trump is even going to accept the outcome of the election if in fact he loses, and what will happen then? We're in a very dangerous period, comrades and friends. Very dangerous period. The right-wing fascist forces that Trump has breathed a lot of life into. This is sort of the end of a period for them, possibly. They had the Trump presidency to sort of lift them up, but that might be changing. Do you think they're going to go away, even if Trump is no longer the president? I don't think so. They're going to be a huge problem, So we've got to be ready, those of us who indeed are ready, to do what we need to do before, during, and after the elections, to fight fascism in the streets if we have to. Beyond that, we've got to have a program and a path that's a little more long-term, but it's not all that long-term. It needs to start now too.
Thank you, Larry. I think both of those comments perfectly sum up, especially how the party feels about that question. And I agree with Larry that one of the things we can do is come together as militant comrades and collectivize our power, because that's when we truly do have power. And that flows perfectly into the next thing that I wanted to say, which is, if you like what you are hearing, then you should become our comrade and join us in this struggle. If you're interested in getting involved in struggles like these, we encourage you to join Workers' World Party. Go to workers.org/join to learn more. So the next question is, the ongoing migrant crisis and US imperialist wars have yet to be addressed in either debate. Why is this? How can revolutionaries intervene to raise consciousness and struggle around these issues?
Well, I think I'll take that first. It's very interesting that the Democrats are ignoring the immigration issue this year because they have in the past made it, paid it a lot of lip service. In fact, I often hear or read that some people think that the Democrats never call demonstrations, and that isn't true, actually. The Democrats actually do organize demonstrations. And sometimes you can come to their demonstrations and they may have speakers that sound really militant, but then they will end with the militancy by saying, vote Democrat, or write a letter or something like that. And that's not what we want. We want fundamental change. So when it comes to the immigrants question, the TPS elements, for example, the migrants who have temporary protective status that came here in the 80s and 90s and had temporary status based on conditions in their homeland, that the TPS is expiring. And we have found out that most of these workers are actually members of unions. And this is going to be a blow to the unions if they are not renewed, if their status is not renewed. 3 years ago, the Democrats would have paid a little bit of attention to this and would have done their usual lip service like they did with DACA and so forth. But interestingly enough, they are ignoring this issue. And that's because it's a hot potato for them right now. There's a push to abolish ICE, just like there is a push to abolish police. And the Democrats cannot go there. They cannot go there. They may be opposed to children in cages, some migrants in cages, but they're not opposed to adults in cages, unfortunately. And I'm not just talking about migrants. I always say that the Democrats led demonstrations against the caging of children, but racism against an anti-Blackness is so profound in this country that the Democrats have never called a demonstration against mass incarceration, for example. And in fact, Kamala Harris was one of those that has not been friendly at all to the issue of releasing those that were falsely charged. And this is something politically that we can point out about her, right? And migrants are being targeted right now more than ever. I do want to say that the conditions, yes, are very difficult. And we all know, we all have family and friends and comrades who are having difficult times, who face depression. And many of us, have a hard time to get out of bed sometimes in the morning. But comrades always do. Comrades always get out of bed and go do the work that's necessary, even if we're getting up later than we used to. The reason why we can be optimistic about these changes is that people are fighting back. I have to take note of Sister Dawn Wooten, for example, who is a worker at an Irwin detention center, a nurse, who blew the whistle on forced sterilizations of migrants in detention and risked losing her job and all kinds of things. I'm sure that she's been attacked by this. This is the kind of resistance and heroic challenges that we are seeing today that we don't even hear about all the time. And we can take heart by the Dawn Wootens of the world, that there's going to be more of them. About 31 years ago, I remember, us old comrades will remember this article that was written by Francis Fukuyama, who, because the Berlin Wall was falling and the Soviet Union was being reformed more pro-capitalist, he wrote this big essay about the history had ended, that globalization was working, that capitalism was working, that diversity was working. And, they said history was ending. And 31 years later, fast forward to what we are facing today, and we see a perfect storm of the possibility of revolutionary change. Young people know that there is no hope under capitalism, and that's why a sector of them were for Bernie Sanders, who was an open socialist. If the Democratic Party was a sign, was a symbol of change, they would have selected. Yes, he's an old white man. They can't seem to get away from it most of the time, but he was for Medicare for all. And it would have been a nod to the base in the Democratic Party that was organizing and angry with capitalism. And they didn't do that. They can't do that, because they are too beholden to Wall Street. But we can take heart that all of those that fought for change, I was excited to see that the many elements that supported Bernie Sanders were not endorsing Biden. And this was a break from the hold of the Democratic Party among young people. And that's what we're seeing more and more today. I'm proud of our party that we have Marxist lens. We see eyes through working class eyes, not through the eyes of the bourgeoisie. And we know that both parties are the same. The Democratic Party may look different. It looks more Black, it looks more brown, it looks more union and all of that. And the Republicans tend to be more white and so forth, more rich, but they're both beholden to Wall Street. Nonetheless, our party understands that there may be some immigrant rights activists, there may be some union activists who have a little bit of hope that if they vote for Biden, that this fascist, sexist, white supremacist president will be defeated and should be defeated. And we're not at odds with those sentiments among genuine people who are fighting for their community, right? We're not at odds with them. And if the Republican Party and Trump has called out for the police to go out to monitor the polls on voting day, I think we should be out there with them, defending Black and brown people who may be voting. Imagine the Republicans and President Trump calling for the very police who killed Breonna Taylor in Georgia to go monitor, the voting sites, many of them that have been closed by the Republican Party and all of that. We should be out there because we want to defend the right of oppressed people and working class people to vote. I'm proud of us that we take that position. But November the 3rd through January the 20th could be a shitstorm in this country because we know that Trump's hubris and his pathology will not allow him to give up that position. He's not going to do it, in my opinion. We don't know, but I don't think he is. And the Democrats are really not capable of fighting against the Republican Party. So we don't know if they're going to go to court. We don't know if they're going to call on the Supreme Court. We don't know. The only thing we know is that the only transfer of power that we must be most concerned with is the transfer of power to the people. And so on November the 4th, the day after the election, we've got to be hitting the streets to organize for COVID relief, to stop police terror and all the rest. That's our program, and that's what we're fighting for. And we're asking everyone to join us out in this fight. And there's a lot of heroes out there. I have to give a shout out to Mattis and Rahman, who are two lawyers who threw a Molotov cocktail at an empty police car, and they're facing life imprisonment, 45 years to life imprisonment. This is fascism. Or this week, ICE agents went to a place in Arizona and shut down an organization that was giving water and food to migrants at the border. They brought in helicopters, SWAT teams, agents, hundreds of agents came to this little community organization that was just providing water and to round up migrants and scare and terrorize the organizers. We've got to fight against that, and we've got to stand in solidarity with all these people who are not going to give up. They're going to continue to organize. So that's what we're all about.
Well said, Teresa.
That's all that anyone has to say on that one. We can move right to the next question. Neither of the candidates have spoken about the rights of the LGBTQ2S+ community, particularly those communities of color and the increasing attacks by racist groups on transgender people, particularly trans women. Why won't they talk about these important issues?
It's actually an interesting irony. During the Democratic Party debates, presidential candidates debate, those issues might have come up. And you certainly hear them talked about on CNN and MSNBC. At one point, it seemed to me that they were trying to co-opt the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's another one of the Democratic Party's games. When they see a movement that's growing and that's dangerous and that's militant, they co-opt it, and then they kill it, so that it's no longer a threat. But the reason why they're not talking about those issues now is because now they're auditioning for the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie is not interested in those issues. The bourgeoisie is interested in exploitation and saving capitalism, which is in desperate need of saving, and it really can't be saved, but that's another discussion. So they're auditioning for the top jobs. So they're not, the bourgeoisie isn't interested in that. The bourgeoisie wants to be reassured that you are not going to be too left, and you are not going to arouse the working class, and that you are not going to arouse the oppressed, and that, you know, if you win and you're allowed to, you know, be the president and the vice president, you basically do what we say. You do what Wall Street says, you know. So you're not going to hear much about that. You're not going to hear much about that. You're going to hear about how, we agree with everything that the bourgeoisie wants. Yeah. Oh, is there going to be some budget cuts? Oh, well, that's possible. You know, I mean, the differences between the two parties are important in the short term, but in the long term, historically, they're nuancial. You know, they're not important. But we're going through a very volatile period, and I totally agree with Teresa in that our argument is not with ordinary people, you know, who are out there and who are fearful and who may believe that, you know, some kind of alternative to Trump is better than Trump, and that determines their vote. Our argument is more with those who consider themselves revolutionaries and socialists and say that they're for a path that's independent of the bourgeois parties, but yet time and time again, they find a rationale for saying that. The way that they say it is not important. They say it in 1,000 ways, but this is what they're saying. Working class, you are forever a hostage to the Democratic Party. In this country, there's no alternative. So stop dreaming. That's it. And this is a huge obstacle to thinking about, dreaming about, trying to construct an alternative to the Democratic Party and the bourgeois party, both bourgeois parties. So this is an argument, a contradiction, a political struggle in the left that's going to get very hot and very real. It already is. But I think because we're in such a volatile period, in the coming days and weeks and months, it's going to get very real. And it will mean that those of us who are dedicated not only to demonstrating that there is an alternative, there is an independent route for the workers and the oppressed of this country, but it's a viable route. It can be a mass route, a popular route that can achieve victory. This is what's on the table now. As for the Democrats, in reality, those who are concerned about fascism, the Democratic Party will lead you to fascism. They will lead you to fascism. Their abandoning of the working class and the oppressed is responsible for the election of Donald Trump. That's why many workers did not come out to vote in 2016, because they were convinced that this party, which had abandoned them to globalization, to what some call neoliberalism, to austerity, to union busting, to the pauperization of sections of the working class that used to think they were middle class, and even worse for those Black and brown oppressed sections of our class that never had any illusions about what they were. And they just, they had no enthusiasm. They were like, the hell with it, Some people worry that could be an issue even in 2020,
right.
But the Democrats, they carry the water for a dying, corrupt capitalist system. They're not interested in the working class other than to fool it and other than to hold it hostage.
Larry, that makes so much.
only forces that are going to call on the working class to defend the working class, especially those who are targeted, whose skins are black and brown, from the fascists who may show up at the polls on November 3rd. Only a working class that will mobilize and fight in its own interests can defend us against fascism. But a party that's dedicated to carrying the water of the ruling class, the imperialist U.S. ruling class, if you latch your hopes for survival to them, well, this is catastrophic, and we have to fight to prevent that.
I just want to add one thing. I'm a lesbian myself, and I think that we have to go on record as our party does in going all out to defend the trans sector of the LGBTQ community.
Yes, the trans sector.
Completely the most oppressed, killed every day, Black trans women especially. And we have to do everything to bring to light, this gross oppression that exists. Pence in particular, one of the reasons why some people may think that it's important to vote out Trump and Pence is because Pence is completely a homophobe, anti-gay person who actually calls and supports conversion therapy for conversion therapy camps for LGBTQ people. As I've said before, we can find some camps for Pence too, when it's our turn. But the important thing is to stand with the trans community and make sure that we do everything to bring this to light about the extreme oppression that is a result of this very sick society.
Exactly, Teresa.
That's important. I just would only add to that, in the movement, in the labor movement, they debate the question of sex workers. That debate is over for us. We support sex workers' rights to organize. A lot of sex workers are trans people. And I think they could become the most militant vanguard leadership of the working class movement. And the debate should be over in the larger working class. We have to stop judging workers based on bigotry and prejudice and homophobia, because that has got us nowhere, and it's sickening, and it's backwards, and it's like cutting your nose off. And embrace them. Embrace the most oppressed. Embrace the trans people, the trans workers, because they very well could be the leadership of our class. They certainly have nothing to lose. They'll fight like hell. That's what I've seen.
I think it's important to mention too that I think that there's a very specific reason that they are not bringing these issues up, because especially Kamala Harris has a reason. She's the one who threw trans women in men's prisons.
Shame on her.
And that continues to happen, and it's disgusting. It's extremely violent. None of us who don't experience trans misogyny can even begin to imagine what it must be like for them in those scenarios. And she had a hand in doing that. And she does not want to own up to it. And I think that we should force her to own up to it or talk about it or something, because.
Yeah, let's face it, she was the top cop in California.
Right. Yep. Cop Malahala.
It's a lot of people look at her and they see a Black woman, a South Asian woman, sure, running for such high office, and you can understand. You can understand why a lot of people, especially people of my generation, say, "Oh wow, that's wow," But the reality is that she was the top cop in California. She was the head of the prison industrial complex in California, and responsible for overseeing all of our people who are dwelling in dungeons, hundreds of thousands of them.
And when we hear people say, oh, it's too difficult. You know, when we hear some elements of the business union say it's too difficult to organize migrants or undocumented or unhoused or unemployed workers. We hear this all the time about incarcerated workers as well. And we have to have the utmost in solidarity for our incarcerated brothers, sisters, and siblings.
They're workers too. Incarcerated workers.
Exactly. And one thing that I'm happy to be able to announce is that we are going to begin printing Workers' World newspaper again on a monthly basis, starting next week, October 15th. It's a great tool to put in the hands of our class, and you can learn more about the subscription and about our paper at workers.org. And one thing that's also so important about the print edition of our newspaper is that it goes out to hundreds and hundreds of our subscribers who are currently incarcerated. And we provide a free subscription to the newspaper for anyone who's currently in the U.S. Mass incarceration system. And I also, since we're talking about it, it just gives me so much joy to be able to say that Jalil Muntakim is free. I also, we've talked about the fascist threat against the Democratic governor of Michigan. We have talked about the increasing danger against trans people, about the tens of thousands of migrants in concentration camps who are now suffering forced sterilizations and the mass death from disease. And a question that I think we've talked about a little bit is Trump fascist? And if he's fascist, should we not be uniting with the Democrats to stop Trump? I think this is a question some people are asking. What do we do if Trump doesn't concede? Or worse yet, what do we do if Trump wins? I think this is a question that's on the minds of the working class right now. And I wonder if our guests can talk on that.
Well, I'll say something real quick. I think he is a fascist. I mean, if it walks like a duck and looks like a duck, it's a duck, right? That kind of thing. But we're not living under a fascist system. That's the difference. And I think that sometimes people think, we are living under fascism. And if we were living under fascism, we would not be able to have this meeting. There are signs that the ruling class, like busting up the demonstrations in Portland, like what Trump did when he went to that church, and pulled everybody out of the way, used the state and the armed agents to get protesters out of the way. Fascist things are happening, that's for sure, but we're not living under fascism yet. I do think that there is an element of the ruling class that is getting ready for it. I do think that, but we don't know. We're not in the boardrooms. We're not in those places where we can hear these things. But we have to be prepared for anything. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important to be internationalist, because there's a lot of activists who don't see the fact that many of our problems could be solved by taking money away from the Pentagon, right? The money that's going to defense could be used for COVID relief, could be used for healthcare, education, and so forth. But imperialism is not going to go away. You can't vote away fascism. You can't vote away imperialism. You have to uproot it. You have to take it out of its roots. And that's an intense struggle. And I know that myself as a seasoned veteran, I have had the great privilege of traveling and meeting many activists and revolutionaries from around the world, specifically in Latin America. I've just been that lucky. And we have sisters and brothers and family in Latin America who have experienced fascism, such as our Chilean comrades under, oh my God, I'm forgetting his name. I want to say Somoza, but it's not Somoza. Oh, anyway, what was his name, Larry? The fascists in Chile. Anyway.
Pinochet.
Pinochet.
Pinochet, ándale, gracias. Pinochet was a fascist, and there was massacres, hundreds of thousands of Chilean workers that were massacred. That was my wife yelling, Pinochet. We're very informal here on this webinar. So, to meet with these comrades, you understand what it takes to stay in this struggle day after day, night after night. And this is why we have to be internationalists, because our comrades and sisters and brothers and family around the world have experienced the naked arm of capitalism, and they have so much to teach us and so much that we can learn from them. And this is why our struggle always has to raise that there's no borders in the working class struggle, that we're not just caring about the working class of the United States, that we care about, every single worker, and especially because US imperialism is the one that has created the conditions that force people to leave their homelands and so forth and so on. So internationalism has to be part of our program in the coming days. And we don't see enough of that right now. And it's understandable because we're fighting against COVID and so forth and so on. But that has to be a tenet, and it is, of the party's work. And it has to be a tenet of the movement in the coming days. We don't want to see the Amazon burned down anymore. We've got to do our part, to show solidarity with the struggles around the world.
From a Marxist perspective, and this underscores what my comrade just said, fascism is viewed differently depending on who you are in society. Many of us, what's a fascist? A fascist is someone who is violently racist, violently homophobic, violently anti-working class, wants to crush unions, wants to smash the oppressed, smash migrant workers, carry out wars, both beyond the borders of the US and inside the borders. From the point of view of the bourgeoisie, they'll say, well, a fascist is somebody who wants to negate bourgeois democracy, be a tyrant, an authoritarian leader, dismiss Congress, just issue edicts, and so forth. What Marxists understand is that fascism does not come from some ideology. It's not born in the heads of people, either the ultra-reactionary or authoritarian police state part of it. Fascism is a desperate, extreme response to a huge crisis in the capitalist system. And the bourgeoisie argues amongst itself, how are we going to save our system? And some will come up and say, well, this is so bad that the only way we can save the system really is to mobilize some social base, the petty bourgeoisie, small business owners, try to infect some of the working class, especially on the basis of racism and white supremacy and homophobia and sexism. And let's go back to the past when oppressed people not only had no rights, but couldn't even lift their head, and let's go back there and let's do whatever we have necessary. And let's smash the unions and smash the working class and divide it. They see fascism, or fascism for them is an extreme, painful solution to what they believe to be a terrifying existential crisis for their system, as in, if they don't do something extreme, maybe they'll lose their system. And I believe that Trump is not just, what a lot of people say about him, the whole bourgeoisie is like Trump. Trump just lets it all hang out, frankly. They say the same thing. All of the sexist, racist, abominable, shit that he says, they say it amongst themselves. Trump sort of realizes that, there's a sector that he can reach to, that he can mobilize on that basis by being honest. Let's attack the oppressed, So that's the way they see it. And I think Trump is caught up in that, if you want to be honest. The question is, how deep is his support in the ruling class? And he has some support in the ruling class. And what is the strength of his social base? I think that these things will be in play. Not that they haven't been in play, but they'll definitely be in play in the coming weeks, in early November and beyond. So we'll sort that out. But I said, in response to a previous question that, you want to fight these fascists? The Democrats will lead you to destruction. The fascists, if it's up to the Democrats, the fascists will win. One has to worry, actually. One has to worry. If, in fact, Biden wins and, his victory is accepted, which is questionable, what will this fascist movement do in response to him? Do you think that they're going to be quiet? Do you think they're just going to say, oh, we lost? You think that's what 2021 is going to be about? I don't know. I think that if we don't find the real strategy for defeating fascism, which is organizing on a class basis for mass class struggle, the workers and the oppressed against the capitalist system, first in small ways, in uneven ways based on where you are, but as time passes, in bigger, more coordinated ways. This is the way that we're going to defeat fascism. This is the lessons that comrades and leaders in the communist movement learned during the 30s in Italy and in Germany and in Spain, and in different ways too in Chile and in Greece, not just now, but 50 years ago, and in many other countries. Of course, the big examples are Hitler and Mussolini and so forth, but they're not by no means the only examples. So it's a turning point. Yes, it's a turning point for those who view themselves as radical, socialist, communist, anti-capitalist, and oriented toward the working class, the importance of the class struggle and the necessity to do what we must do to organize our class. And that's a lot of work. But who said that anything important would not be a big challenge and a lot of work? And actually, it's that understanding and it's a commitment to do that work that makes you a revolutionary, not just some good rhetoric or a nice speech. That's always nice. But, in a crisis, are you ready to get down? Are you ready to do what you have to do? Are you ready to put in the time, the sacrifices? Comrades like Teresa and I, we've been around a while. We've seen a lot. One of the things you can learn from us, survival. We're still here.
Amen.
We survived all sorts of shit, ups and downs, and we're still here. And now we're a resource for younger revolutionaries.
And we're grateful for your
Who
comments.
must take the leadership. Who must take the leadership. That's Teresa and our jobs now. We're your mentors. You want to know some things, you come talk to us. But you got to lead it. You got to take the reins. for the most part, that part of our contribution, we done that. That's over. Now we're here to sit with you and hold your hands and say, well, this is what I learned.
Just one thing on fascism. People should take note of this and know that Comrade Fidel Castro always said that fascism would not come to the United States. And I believe him. And it has to do, we could talk about this all night, but it has to do with the people of this country. We hate this government, we hate this system, but we love our working class. And our working class is not going to allow fascism in this country.
Totally agree.
They'll believe that, and I agree with him.
Thank you, Larry and Teresa, for all the work you've done and for being such amazing comrades generally. Before we get to our last question, I just will have one more announcement that I want to bring up. Everything under capitalism costs money. We want to encourage you to donate to Workers' World Party so that we can keep growing our audience. And you can do this at workers.org/donate or on Venmo at Workers World. So the last question that we have is, could you discuss the role of the Supreme Court and the concern about the right-wing nominee to alter the political character of the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it's worrisome, but we cannot get too worried, because history shows over and over that it's not who's on the courts, it's not who's in Congress, but who's in the streets. And the most recent example is the Supreme Court recently ruled two favorable actions with regards to DACA, and I forgot what the specifics were on the LGBTQ question. And people were surprised because it came from such a reactionary Supreme Court, but they could not, this happened right after the George Floyd rebellion, right? So they couldn't have another rebellion in the streets of queers and DACA recipients. So they had to give some concessions. So that's what we have to keep in mind, that it's the struggle, it's the fight in the streets, it's mass organizing that's decisive, not who's on the Supreme Court. Nonetheless, we are going to see some messed up stuff, anti-abortion things and so forth and so on. So we have to keep fighting for our rights.
On a practical basis, in terms of what to expect tomorrow, if there's an issue that becomes before the Supreme Court, it's very troubling. But there's a lie, there's an illusion that the Supreme Court is above politics. The Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. They don't have to be elected. Blah 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 blah. There is no body in the ruling class government, the executive, the legislative, or the judicial, that is above politics. That's BS. They will respond to the struggle in the streets, and more generally and historically, the class struggle. And I think progressive people would be worried about a Supreme Court dominated by, quote unquote, right-wing judges, as we would be. But the solution to that is to build the movement, the working class movement. And when I say working class, the working class is every movement. The working class is the Black Lives Matter movement. The working class is the movement for LGBTQ2S rights. The working class is the movement for women's liberation. The working class is the struggle of migrant children in cages and their families. The class struggle is the struggle against imperialist war. All these struggles are different fronts in a global class struggle. And we hope that more and more radicals and activists begin to see it this way, because our movement has been so declassed. The problem is not that they're different sections. Obviously, they're going to be different. There's going to be a movement for this and a move. That's natural and that's welcome, and we embrace that. The problem is that in this atmosphere where the class struggle seems to have no importance and sometimes doesn't even seem to exist, there's no connection. There's no real connection between these struggles. We have to continue to fight to convince people that these different movements are both different, which is understandable and necessary, but also part of a broader global class struggle, and not just a bunch of other struggles out there, on their own, or even fighting each other, which is the impression that you get when the way that they attach on identity politics and stuff like that. Maybe we should have a webinar on that. But as the working class struggle learns this and embraces all these struggles, conservatism of the labor movement is a big problem, because they like to, instead of embracing, they sort of, that's not important to us. A little bit of the reason why we have all this confusion. But even the conservatism of the labor movement, especially at the leadership level, that's not just bad people. It would be too simplistic to say they're bad people. It's based on generations of political degeneration from the point of view of revolutionary Marxism. That is now in the period of reviving itself, which is another real dynamic that makes this such a interesting / challenging, but very promising period, because revolutionary ideology is fighting its way back. It's like what, I think someone said it maybe in this webinar. If I'm not, I'm channeling somebody else, but capitalism, 30 years ago. Oh yeah, Teresa was saying it 31 years ago. Capitalism's dead. I mean, socialism's dead. Socialism's dead. It's the end of history. Well, I'll tell you what, maybe not.
If there's one thing we know, it's that everything changes all the time. And that the basis of our success, Larry, like you said, is solidarity with every sector of the working class. And Teresa, on the question of internationalism, you just made me think when a delegation of Fight for Immigrants and Refugees Everywhere went down to across the U.S.-Mexico border to one of the migrant camps on the other side, on the Mexico side. One of the organizers from Honduras asked me, are you more of a Hillary Clinton guy? Or are you more of a Bernie Sanders guy? And I was like, I'm more of a Fidel person myself. And immediately, no more words needed to be said. We understood each other completely. But comrades, I have the unfortunate task now of bringing this conversation to a close. I know that we could keep doing this for hours, but this has been amazing. I love this format for these conversations. And I just want to say to everybody listening at home, if you like this conversation, and if you want to read more specifically from Larry and Teresa, and other great comrades from Workers' World Party, you can check out our new book, What Road to Socialism. You can buy it online. You can also download a copy for free at workers.org/books. And, if you're a Fidel person, if you're a Larry Holmes, Teresa Gutierrez person, I think that I would encourage you to consider joining Workers' World, and to really help us bring this revolutionary struggle to the next phase. You can learn more at workers.org/join. And I'll tell you, speaking personally, it is the best decision that you could make. But I also I just want to thank everybody for being on tonight. This was great. And make sure that you tune in next week at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, for another Workers' World broadcast. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have a great webinar from the Workers' World Party Disability Rights Caucus at this time, Thursday, 2 weeks from now, the 22nd. In the meantime, everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and build a workers' world.
All power to the youth.
All power. Build a workers' world.
Build a workers' world.
Good night, folks.